Final Fantasy VI, the novel by Celes Chere. Category: Final Fantasy VI. Status: completed. Rating: T. Words: 300,295. Summary: this is a full novelization of Final Fantasy VI. Join Terra and the Returners, whose mission to overthrow a threatening empire turns into a life-altering, world-shattering adventure. Complete and uncut. 1. The World of Balance. Long ago, the War of the Magi reduced the world to a scorched wasteland, and magic simply ceased to exist. 1,000 years have passed. Iron, gunpowder, and steam engines have been rediscovered, and high technology reigns. But there are some who would enslave the world by reviving the dread destructive force known as magic. Can it be that those in power are on the verge of repeating a senseless and deadly mistake? Chapter 1: The Girl with the Magitech Armor. The night that Narshe was invaded was like any other night in the quiet town. In that evening, Narshe had been dusted with a gentle snowfall, and a soft wind carried the voices of mothers and fathers everywhere who were calling their children in for the night. Lanterns in the windows of shops were put out, and were replaced by the electric lamps outside on the streets. The town guards of Narshe, consisting of both youth and elderly men alike, dressed in their warm fleece uniforms and caps and kissed their loved ones goodbye as they left for their nighttime posts. As they walked, their feet left imprints in the snow that would only be replaced by more snow the next morning and disappear. That was how it was all around Narshe. Change that ever occurred would be quick and easily replaced with the familiar. The city elders saw to that. Narshe was invisible to change, and independent from the rest of the world. Or so he thought. Narshe was snugly set in the most northern mountain range in the world. It was a coal mining town, where most of the men either worked as miners in the day, or guards at night, or even both. A common monster in Narshe was the lobo, a wolf-like creature that the soldiers trained to hunt intruders. However, the cliffs and mountains outside of Narshe were considered dangerous territory, and no guards or lobos even were sent there. It was the elders' law to protect the villagers. But even the law could only be carried out so far. And on the night that Narshe was invaded, footsteps graced those cliffs and mountains. Big, metal, burning hot footsteps. Standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking Narshe were 3 sets of a monstrous type of armor. Steam and sparks of a magical substance burst out of them every few seconds, but they appeared stable, and let out a low purr from their motors. Each one of the armor sets contained a person. 2 of them were men clad in brown armor and low helmets that hid their faces, while the other was occupied by a petite woman with emerald green hair and dull green eyes. However, it wasn't the color that was dull. There seemed to be almost a haze in them. At some points, her lips would move as if to form a sentence, but then suddenly, they would stop, and fall back to their emotionless state.
"Hey Wedge, there's the town,"
one of the soldiers said, in a bold and deep voice. He looked away from the town to his fellow armored partner. Wedge sneezed and rubbed his nose.
"Hard to believe an esper has been found intact in there, 1,000 years after the War of the Magi."
His voice trailed off, almost as if he were afraid. He looked at Vix, his partner, and let out an obvious squeal of fear. Wedge had always been the less brave of the 2 friends/partners, but he was smarter, being the information officer. Vix smirked.
"Think it's still alive?"
Wedge nodded.
"Probably, judging by the urgency of our orders."
The wind picked up right then, the cold piercing right through their armor. Vix and Wedge cried out, but the girl didn't make a sound, and she was wearing far less protective clothing than them. Vix could not believe it.
And this woman, this sorcerer. Why's she here? I heard she fried 50 of our Magitech armored soldiers in fewer than 3 minutes.
Vix looked to Wedge, who shrugged.
Not to worry. The slave crown on her head robs her of all conscious thought. She'll follow our orders.
Wedge stared at the girl as he said this. The slave crown was a simple brown headband from the view of the ordinary eye, but to Vix and Wedge, who knew better, it was a memory-sucking machine that ravaged one's mind apart, seeking and destroying any unique thought. Neither soldier could imagine what the poor girl might have been going through with that thing on her head. But, neither one cared enough to do anything. After a few moments of silence other than the howling winds which got colder and stronger, Wedge cleared his throat and turned his Magitech armor away from the cliff.
We'll approach from the east,
he ordered.
Move out.
The loud clanking of the Magitech armor could only be heard by its 3 pilots as they traveled down the cliffside and into the heart of the mountains. Laser beams and other weapons that were equipped on the armor made quick work of any animal or monster that got in their way, and also cleared the path for them when it was needed. Soon, the team had emerged from the mountains into a plain and empty snowfield, and snow had begun to fall. Following the navigation devices on the Magitech armor, the team traveled towards Narshe from an angle so that their lookouts could not spot them until it was too late. When they had reached the city gates, they saw that any forces that had been there had withdrawn. This was exactly what they thought would happen, and they were ready.
Let's put her on point. No sense taking any risks,
Wedge said, adjusting his navigation system so that it would bring up a field map of Narshe. Vix followed, as did the girl. Very stiffly, like a robot, she then took hold of her controls and moved her armor ahead of the group so that she was the leader. She turned her attention ahead of her and awaited further orders. Vix nodded approval, and Wedge shouted, "Forward!" As soon as the team entered Narshe, they were approached by a pair of charging guards with a lobo. Vix and Wedge tried desperately not to laugh.
Machine writing, self-important swine. Take this!
The guards cried in unison as the lobo leaped at them. The girl, without a moment of hesitation, pushed a blue button on the control panel, causing her Magitech armor to making a loud revving sound and a lens to slide open at the front. With a single burst of energy, a blue sparkling beam shot out of the lens of the armor, hitting the lobo and instantly freezing it in a block of ice. The lobo fell from midair to the snowy street with a thump, and the girl stared directly at the guards.
Withdraw!
One of them cried, and the 2 took off running before anything else could be done. The girl looked back to her controls, and continued to lead the team down the street. When they had reached the inn, they were suddenly ambushed by 2 different guards, their glistening spears in hand.
Imperial Magitech armor!
One cried.
Not even Narshe safe anymore!
The other exclaimed, slamming his spear against Vix's armor. Disgusted, Vix slammed his fist down on a yellow button, causing a bolt of lightning to hit the guard's partner. With a loud scream, the man flew back and smashed into the inn, dying instantly. The other guard, horrified, took off running, but Wedge caught him from behind with a brutal fire beam. Crying out, he collapsed into the snow, rolling about to try to put himself out. As the girl continued ahead, one of her metal feet came down on the man's head, putting him out of his suffering instantly. The trek through Narshe still proved to be eventful, as they came across more guards and Lobos shouting out their battle cries before ultimately meeting their doom 5 seconds later. The girl, although it just barely registered in her mind, realized that these people must have been protecting something important. But what was it? She flinched as a ripping shock went through her head, making her forget everything she had just thought about.
Narshe's freedom depends on us. We've got them trapped, now. We must defend the mines.
The guards' voices echoed off of the nighttime sky, each followed by either a scream of horror or agony as they were frozen, electrocuted, burned, or even gassed by some of the more advanced weaponry on the girl's armor. Finally, the team had reached their goal point, Narshe's mines.
According to our source, the frozen esper was found in a new mine shaft. Maybe this one.
Wedge trailed off and once again, adjusted his navigation. The girl's armor jerked forward, and soon, they were inside the freezing cold mines of Narshe. It was a very small mine though, and soon, the group had come upon a large open area in the mine that was protected by a gate of wooden planks nailed together.
I'll handle this. Stand back.
Vix cried. He charged ahead of the group, slamming right through the gate with the loud clatter of broken wood planks hitting the walls and the floor. However, they were surprised when out of the darkness emerged a tall man who was dressed like all of the other guards they had fought, only his uniform was more colorful and sported several badges. This must have been the captain of the Narshe guards.
We won't hand over the esper,
he cried, and stepped aside.
Welk. Get them. Gru.
A low growl erupted throughout the mines, as another shadow emerged from the darkness ahead. However, this shadow proved to be more threatening than the guard. It was a huge monster, one that almost resembled a giant snail with glowing red eyes and a spiny purple shell at its rear. Letting out another growl, its antennae suddenly shot out and slashed at the Magitech armor. Everyone cried out, even the girl, as the shock that the armor was supposed to absorb for them was failing miserably. The captain of the guards burst out into laughter and quickly retreated, leaving them to die. The team tried to fire various beams at the whelk, however, they were all absorbed by its shell, and the lashes by the antennae just got stronger. Vix moaned, racking his brains trying to figure out how to beat this wretched thing. A whelk was a naturally hostile creature, and very hard to train. This must have been Narshe's ultimate weapon. Suddenly, he had it.
Hold it!
He cried frantically.
Think back to our briefing. What about it?
Wedge replied, trying to turn to Vix.
Do you recall hearing about a monster that eats lightning?
Vix began.
Oh. And stores the energy in its shell.
Wedge finished happily.
Right. So whatever you do, don't attack the shell.
Vix yelled.
The head is its weakest point. All right already.
Wedge snapped, and pulled his armor back a little.
Girl. Finish it off with a tech missile.
That was the most powerful attack a Magitech system held, and the girl was the only one with it equipped. She gave a small nod, and pushed a white button on her control panel. All at once, the lens in the front of the machine opened again, and a load of missiles shot out one after one, shaking the Magitech armor violently but striking the whelk square on target. When the last missile unloaded, slamming right into one of the whelk's eyes, it let out a massive roar and slowly, its slimy head shrunk and melted into its shell. A small beeping could be heard, which meant that the bomb that was always contained in a final tech missile was activated. With a terrific explosion, the shell exploded and shattered, pieces bouncing off the walls and Magitech armor.
Cover your eyes,
Vix demanded, and all of the Magitech pilots dove further down in their armor until the danger had passed. Vix popped up first, then Wedge, then the girl. Vix grinned and pointed ahead. The girl trudged on, stopping when the darkness in the area blossomed into a beautiful shining light. Ahead of the team was a large, frozen block of ice. Contained in it was a massive bird-like creature, its wings spread and its yellow beak open as if in the middle of a screech. Its feathers were every color of the rainbow, and its talons were long and well sharpened. The ice that trapped it started to glimmer and shine, and began to glow a light blue.
"This is the frozen esper!"
Vix exclaimed. Suddenly, the girl, even though she had no orders, approached the creature. Her eyes widened as she got closer, the blue glow illuminating off of her soft and pale complexion. She had a small, peaceful smile on her face.
"Hey, what's the matter?"
Wedge cried.
"Do you know something we don't?"
She did not reply. It was as if she never heard him.
"Impossible!"
Vix scoffed.
"She's just a..."
Suddenly, the light that the creature had been emitting got stronger, almost blinding. It filled up the entire mine, and swallowed up the Magitech pilots.
"Where's that light coming from?
Wedge screamed, and suddenly, his body was vaporized into nothing. Vix widened his eyes and felt like his own flesh was about to burst into flames.
"Hey, Wedge!"
he cried in a weak voice.
"Where are you? What? What's happening?"
All at once, too weak to scream, Vix collapsed to the ground and vanished as well. Only the girl was remaining now, unharmed, and unmoved by the events that had just unfolded around her. She said nothing as she continued towards the esper. The light for her was warm, and serene. There was nothing to be frightened of. For once, the slave crown had failed to dispose of these thoughts and feelings. Something was stopping it. The girl reached out, wanting to touch and feel the light for herself. Suddenly, with a loud crash, a bolt of light shot out from the esper at the girl, striking her directly in the chest. She closed her eyes and wrapped her arms around herself as the light enclosed over her body, making her glow like the esper. Her Magitech armor exploded in a fiery mess, but the flames and metal did not graze one part of her body. The girl let out a soft moan and lowered her head. Her heart had begun to ache with a longing for something that she just couldn't remember. All at once, the light stopped, and the warmth went away. The girl collapsed to the ground, passed out, and the coldness of Narshe's mind settled into her bones once again. She was not aware of the hurried footsteps that were approaching her body. 2. The trail-worn traveler lock. XXXIIIXXX